everybody, we're at the Imp and Ogre. My name is Paul.
This is Ryan.
And today we are going to be chatting about Dead in the Thay.
All right, so the usual rundown. Dead in Thay was written by Scott Fitzgerald Gray. This is a 2014 5th edition adventure. The one we are looking at comes out of Tales from the Yawning Portal, which you can get on, I guess, as a hardcover or through the D&D Beyond. The D&D Next Module version of this is available as a PDF on the DM's Guild, but I think the final polished one is not. The nice thing about the next module, I think this was actually created for the playtest, is that it has everything that you need to run it in the appendices, so you don't need to have access to monster manuals and what have you to actually be able to run it, which is, a plus, really.
Yeah, well, you're getting everything that you're paying for when you get it.
Yeah, I mean, granted, there's some revisions between, the polishing of the playtest version versus the actual one that's available in the Tales from the Yawning Portal. But, if you're familiar with the game, you can sort of hand wave it.
Yeah, Dead in the Thay is...
It's a mega dungeon.
It's a mega dungeon. It's quoted as a tribute to the Tomb of Horrors and Ruins of Undermountain. I guess another mega dungeon, maybe.
Yeah, the Undermountain's the giant mega dungeon from the Forgotten Realms under Waterdeep. It's the Doom Vault.
Yeah, so this adventure takes place in the Doom Vault, designed for 9th level characters. A number of 9th level characters. So the Bloodgate is an interconnected series of teleportation circles which survived the Thayan resurrection. Anyway, there's a whole host of lich phylacteries in there which you're supposed to go in and find and destroy.
The one thing I did kind of appreciate regarding this is that it's all built around the Red Wizards of Thay, which is a very setting specific faction, if you will, but it isn't really anything super specific about the Red Wizards. So you could basically reskin this mega dungeon to deal with any type of bad guy group. And even the end goal here, I guess the main mission we can kind of get to in a second here, is to destroy the phylacteries that are found in the center of the Doom Vault. But if you were running this, you don't need it to be phylacteries. It can literally be any type of MacGuffin that you have for your campaign can be found there.
Yeah,
so
books, people, anything.
Magic artifact that you need to stop the end of the world. It can pretty much be anything can be found in there, and the way it's structured, it provides that level of flexibility.
Yeah, I agree. Like we said, it's just a huge mega dungeon. I think probably we're getting a little formulaic with our big dungeons, and we'll just pick up things we liked about it. And because if we spend our whole time talking about it, we're going to be here for
we're not going to go through everything. I mean, I think at this point, I've made my general distaste for mega dungeons pretty well known for people that have listened to past podcasts. I do like a number of the sections of this mega dungeon, and I could easily see myself stealing chunks of it, because there's so many parts of this mega dungeon that you could easily just use as a dungeon.
Yeah, well, every single section of it could be a dungeon in itself, and that's sort of, I don't know, as a player I'd get tired of the dungeon, right? It's like, oh, you're in the plant zone, and now you're in the undead zone, and then you just continue and move back and forth. And of course, like all mega dungeons, there's a safe place and a safe person that you can go back to and rest and sleep, and then teleport back into the dungeon and keep going in and out.
It's got a very video gamey kind of design aesthetic to it, which is fine if that's your thing. It's just not my thing in general. I mean, the main shtick, I guess, of the mega dungeon is that there's a bunch of portals that serve effectively as key-carded doorways. Yeah, is the way I thought of it. Is you got to find the key card. So you can
like
open
Metroid style lock play,
Resident Evil type of. Yeah, you got to find the right tool to open the gate and so on and forth, which I thought was fine from a way of separating the different areas and explaining how come the different monsters from the different areas aren't constantly, barging into the different places, right? Why are the water monsters not attacking the plant monsters and so on and so forth? But I was thinking mostly from a bookkeeping perspective. keeping track of which portals go where and what keys your players have access to strikes me as something that I could easily forget, and it would get a little frustrating in my opinion. I did like that the whole adventure is basically written like a raid. Like it's a kick down the door, cause a ruckus, and get out structure. Like it's unlike a lot of mega dungeons, it's not suggested that this is a methodical room by room clearing. It's very much a get in, find your target, end the threat, get out.
Yeah, and well, I think part of that they've built in the system. There's the alert system that they used in this, and which was a counting up system from 0 to 4, and whatever it is, arbitrary. But the more encounters you get in, the alert system is increased throughout the dungeon, so you're more likely to get into more encounters. So I think that lends itself to being like a guerrilla tactics kind of get in, get out, get what you need, go rest up, and wait until you can get to the next spot.
I did like that there was instigating sort of events that increase the alertness level, but also ones that can decrease it. Right, so you can sort of have some NPC encounters where they're willing to help you out, so they'll spread some false information or cover for you, and that can bring down the alertness level. So I did like that. I mean, the main way of getting to the end boss area, the phylactery chamber in the center, involves activating, I think, six black gates, which are spread throughout the entire dungeon. But there's like I don't know, 24, 36 of them. So once you know what you're supposed to do, which is probably the hardest part of this adventure, is actually figuring out how to get to the center.
You just end up doing it accidentally, because I think once you do it, the woman, your contact, is like, "Hey, good job. It's open now."
The Deus Ex Machina, the voice in your head tells you that.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's that clear. From my reading, it seemed that you had to find the area where they were stealing the essences, is what I think, but I'm not 100% sure, and we'll get to that in a second here. What else did I like? I like that it was sort of it's a modular design, if you will, for a mega dungeon. So as video gamey as the structure is, it is discrete areas.
Right.
So if you wanted to break it up, you can break it up. Like the players can clear the water dungeon, and then they can clear the fire temple, and then they can clear the forest temple. You know what I mean? Like, it's coherent in its structure. So I don't think you're going to get confused, and especially for the players, because there's so many interconnections between it. If they pop in a portal and they jump into a room, they should very easily be able to recognize that this is a place that we've been before. Yeah,
the themes within the places are distinct. Yeah, you're right. You're not going to get confused as to where you are, where you haven't been yet. Like, it'd be obvious that you're in a new area just by the theme of the monsters.
Because that's another, like, mapping this place out as a player would be very difficult, because there's all the gates and the portals and the jumping around aspect to it.
One of the things that I don't know if I like or don't like, but they have, like, you can't die when you're in it. I don't know if that's good or bad. So the characters in the Doom Vault, if your PC dies, your soul can continue to be bound to your body, and you could just continue playing your character as an undead character. So there's no, you can't fail in here per se. You can't die. You just, I don't know, like, if everyone is an undead, do you just all revive and continue to keep going? Or at what point do you say, like, okay, you've failed?
Well, I think as structured, the thing is you can be soul bound, or whatever they call it. And if that happens, you are fine, but you can never leave the Doom Vault. As soon as you leave the Doom Vault, you die. And it requires a ritual to, undo whatever happened to you. And you can find out that ritual in the Doom Vault, but again, it's not a given.
No.
Right? Like, it's not hard to find this out. Like, they don't really hide it. But I think if you end up becoming soulbound, this adventure definitely becomes more grindy, because unless you are willing to just give up on that PC, you're going to have to devote effort to clearing the dungeon to find the bit of information to be able to get fixed.
Which I don't think is like, I don't know if that's a good mechanic, because your players are going to want to keep their characters.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think once they're dead, you've given them an opportunity to continue to play their character, and if there's a hint that they could get their soul back and restore their life in their character, they're probably going to want to do it, as opposed to just being like, well, you know, you kind of you failed, you died. Yeah. And that's like the theme of the other mega dungeons that you've gone through. It's like, well, you can die, and there's risk in going into it, and here there's almost no risk, right? So take it or leave it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, it's something I liked. I like that there's lots of enemies that were willing to negotiate or surrender. Right, a lot of the red wizards are cowards at heart, and are willing to just be like, whoa, let's talk here.
Yeah.
And a lot of the intelligent monsters in the different areas are trapped, right, because they don't have the key card access, so they can't leave. So I did kind of like that in a number of cases you could just like give them a key card and say, go have fun, and then just go cause a ruckus somewhere else.
So they call them low threat monsters.
Well, that's a different thing. Yeah. The reduced threat monster was something else that I actually liked as well, because I like minions from 4th edition, and a reduced threat 5th edition monster, which we've done a couple of other 5th edition modules, and I don't know that it ever caught on as a thing in general. I think it's probably something that people complained about during the playtest, but I wasn't a part of that, so I'm just hypothesizing.
Whatever, yeah.
But the idea behind the reduced threat monster is it's a monster that has weaker stats. So you can fight an ogre, but the ogre's only got a third of the regular stats for reasons. Oh, they've been worked really hard, or yada, yada, yada.
Yeah. Makes you feel powerful.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it serves a purpose because it still creates a threat, but it's less likely to destroy you. And that's why I really liked it in 4th edition minions, right? For those of you who never played 4th edition or have blotted out of your brain, minions were basically creatures that had the regular battle stats of, say, an ogre or an orc or what have you, but they only had 1 hit point. So it was just as difficult to hit them as a regular monster, and they did as much damage as a regular monster, but if your players actually landed a hit on it, they would always die. And I always really enjoyed that because its whole design of a minion was to make characters feel like they were getting more powerful.
Yeah.
Right? That like, you're a 10th level warrior, so yeah, ogres are minions to you, so you can cut your way through all of these enemies to get to the real threat, the dragon or what have you.
And it makes you feel cool too. I don't know, like when you've got all these awesome spells and you're only casting them people that can deal with the spell, like, well then why not just be level 1 and fighting level 1 things as well? Like I think it was this certain like sense of feeling awesome when you huck a fireball or whatever it is into 100 things and you blast 80 of them away, right? And I think that gets lost in some of the higher level adventures that we've read. It's just kind of like they nullify your toolkits and you don't really feel special anymore and you're not quite feeling powerful anymore.
Well, it's also just the design structure of the game, right? Like, if you don't have a system in place like minions, the only type of monsters that you can do that on, use a fireball and blow everyone away, are low-level threats, which aren't worth hardly any experience points, so players aren't going to want to do that.
Yeah.
Right? You're not going to get 10th level PCs excited to go run an adventure for first level adventurers, which is actually kind of funny because when you think about it, the more famous you get as players, the more of those adventures you should be thrown at you. Right? Because the average person suddenly knows who you are, right? So you're traveling through town and everyone's like, oh my goodness, it's Steve the Paladin. You're super famous. There are these orcs that keep stealing my cows.
That would be like a funny thing, like to prep for a table if you're a DM. Like at the start of every adventure, just print off like 20 envelopes of things and being like, your servant shows up and hands you your mail. And it's like, the rats won't stop eating the thing. Yeah, the peasants are stealing our hay. And like all these just mundane things, like hooks to just these trash adventures that they should never do.
Which is actually kind of interesting because most games don't have this, but imagine you have a mechanic where you're dealing with fame, right? Because most of the things that people are going to want you to do as you become more powerful as characters are these low-level, trash quests, if you will, all your gray quests. But if you keep saying no to people, they're going to think you're dicks.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, yeah, he's too good to help the common people out. He only wants to help the nobility, because the nobility are the ones that are going to have the bigger rewards and the bigger threats, right? So I could definitely see an arc where your characters sort of become heroes.
Like the celebrities that don't read their mail, never respond to fan mail.
Exactly.
Don't sign signatures. Yeah.
They're not really the people's champions anymore, right? They start off as the people's champions, and then they end up being, on their ivory towers, and kind of like booed a little bit, So I could definitely see how not all common folk, if you will, would actually like your PCs, regardless of how famous they are, because they're too good now. Oh, suddenly you're too good to... help us out with the kobolds. I remember you back when you, before you sold out. Yeah. Right? Back when you were cool. So I just think that's kind of would be a funny dynamic to have. One thing before we get into just sort of talking about some of the specific highlights. The best part of this whole adventure isn't even the main focus of it. And that made me a little sad. Right? So the most amazing part isn't even to the forefront, and they really bury the lead on this one. Right? So part of this sort of assumes that DMs running this adventure would be somewhat familiar with the Forgotten Realms lore, if you will. But in brief, I guess apparently the default Forgotten Realms setting, there are individuals that are infused with the power of their deity and work as that particular god's chosen champion. Now, I haven't been super familiar with the more recent Forgotten Realms stuff. Like, when I was reading this, it reminded me of stuff that I encountered back in the day, because I remember, like, Elminster was the chosen of Mystra, and there was Mistress chosen, but apparently, obviously, the setting has shifted to include this for every god.
Yeah.
There's all types of... It's sort of an evolving setting, and I'm not up to date on it. So feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, anybody out there. But the point is there's these divinely infused god champions, if you will. And it seems like there's one for each god in the Forgotten Realms. And the leader of the Red Wizards... Svastam, he's a lich, and he's trying to achieve godhood. So one of his schemes to do that is to siphon the divine power from these champions to funnel it towards him. How is that not the focus of this whole adventure?
Instead of just destroying phylacteries?
Exactly. How is this not the main hook? And when we talk about hooks, I'll get back to this. But, like, it is a super interesting, high-level adventure hook.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a throwaway in the specific adventure. Right? Like, it's not the main focus by any means.
No, not at all. And that's like, I mean, I like skimmed most of the adventure, but I know what you're talking about, like the part of the adventure that you're talking about, but that doesn't even like ring a bell in my head as like that should have been the focus of the adventure.
It's a huge, champions of the gods are being kidnapped, having their energy drained, and then presumably just disposed of.
Right.
One would think that
the gods would not be happy with that.
Would at least be aware that their chosen champion has been captured and would be looking for help.
Like that would be a pretty cool hook. Like if, say, you had a cleric or something that their god came and visited them and said that their champion has gone missing. Like, can you that is a more interesting lead than what they have here, where you just show up at the thing.
You don't even show up. You randomly like get teleported and wake up in sort of a...
You're just there.
And then the lady Red Wizard just exposition dumps in your brain, effectively. Like, this is what you need to do. Oh, I wrote the default hook is trash. unless you're running this as a one-off. Which, if you're using this for playtesting, I can totally understand that. Like when it was designed to just be run alone because there wasn't anything else.
Yeah.
For it, right. Like it just wasn't first level adventures.
I mean, this is the rewritten version of it that we're doing too. They could have an opportunity to make something neat out of it.
Yeah, it's as is. It's still trash, right? Like what did it say? You're randomly teleported to the Doom Vaults by a member of the Red Wizard Resistance, which is basically just the Anti-Necromancy League. Right? Like, they're not good people. They're just like, we think other schools of magic should also be used for evil world domination.
Yeah.
Right? So this person who teleported you gives you a quest to destroy the phylacteries, and then you really can't say no because you've just been captured effectively.
Yeah.
Also, I don't really see the point of destroying phylacteries unless there's a plan in place to destroy the lich immediately, because isn't that just sort of like an expensive like
jar?
Well, yeah. I mean, because you can, if a lich's phylactery gets destroyed, they can just make a new one.
Yeah.
Now,
unless the soul is in the phylactery. Isn't that the whole, like, don't you have to kill the lich, send their soul to the phylactery, and then destroy the phylactery, then destroy a lich?
Right? Because if a lich's phylactery is intact after it's been destroyed, it will reconstitute itself within X number of days.
Even a more interesting hook could have been like a lich killing other liches and storing their phylacteries and then siphoning energy from them. You know, like that's more interesting. Anyway, I think...
I don't know. This seemed just like a really good way of pissing off like a dozen liches.
Mm-hmm.
So if the rest of your campaign wants to be your players running away from liches, like trying to kill
the League
them,
of Liches.
The League of Liches, yeah. Because that's literally what you would do. Because it wouldn't end the threat of the lich whatsoever.
Yeah. The League of Extraordinary Lichmen.
But anyways, so the hook, I think, is that the capturing of the divine champions to siphon their power is way better. It's pure gravy.
Mm-hmm.
So I like an idea more that's the main hook. That's what gets the players invested in investigating and finding out about this. And then if while they're doing this main thing, trying to rescue the champion of whatever god you want it to be, they can also find out that this is where phylacteries are, and they can destroy them. So like this is our main point, but we can also kick this. You know, we can cause harm to the people that are responsible for this at the same time.
And also adding in like perhaps a potentially very awesome reward, and maybe you could become the champion of one of your gods at some point. Like you're a high enough level that it would seem reasonable that could be something, right? Because really there's no... I mean, we talk about this a lot in our adventures. Yeah. There's no desire for your PCs aside, unless there was liches built into their campaign already, and some of them happen to be there. But otherwise, you're being held hostage to go and do this for this person. And
oh yeah, I mean, I think if I was going to use this hook, which I think the main conceit of this adventure is super cool, more so than the mega dungeon itself. But I could definitely see a campaign where, as the PCs are progressing, maybe a champion of a god becomes one of their patrons, and then their patron goes missing, and suddenly they're invested to go looking into it, right? And you can even have this running over multiple adventures, right? The patron could go missing early on, and through their investigation they can find out some other people have gone missing, or they can, by dealing with like other church groups, they can find out that, oh yeah, it happened to one of ours as well. They died and we never, found out what happened.
Like, what do you think about, I mean, this is a mega dungeon, but if, say you had this as, when we were talking about campaign ideas now, like there's so many parts of this dungeon that you could easily put into any sort of environment that you wanted to, and they could all be, each section of the mega dungeon could be a dungeon in itself. Like, I think it would be a good idea to consider taking these mega dungeons and deconstructing them, and then putting them throughout a campaign as an overarching campaign, right? Like you're doing something in the jungles. You could stick like the plant jungly version of this somewhere, and there's a black gate inside of it, and they destroy a black gate. And then the cumulative destruction of these gates over the duration of a campaign ends up granting them access to, the end portion of the dungeon where they can get into the phylactery area, you know what I mean? Like instead of just plopping them in and like, okay, we're here for a 12 session mega dungeon run that you're going to get bored of probably. I think that would be a neat way to incorporate these mega dungeons into a campaign without all of a sudden just being like, well, we're doing a mega dungeon.
I think that's a better way to go about it. I mean, you don't even have to have the portals involved in it whatsoever, right? It can just literally be a MacGuffin they need to get, or it can just be information. You just use the good old-fashioned letter. You're basically just following up the hierarchy. Right?
Yeah.
Like you could just see a thing where you hit the laboratory of a low-ranking red wizard and you find out who his boss is. And you just basically are working your way up the corporate ladder until you find out who's in charge of this main plot.
Yeah, because for sure this could be rewritten into a campaign easily after you brainstorm those ideas with the champions.
You'd have to tweak the monster power levels, obviously, right? Like you can't just throw third level players against an Aboleth or whatever, right? But from a structural standpoint, you just have to tweak some of the monsters they would encounter. And yeah, because as is, it doesn't really need to be run as a single cohesive dungeon.
Should we get talking through some of the parts of
the actual analysis of it? So basically I broke it up based off of the mini sections. Is how I did it. And I make my two general comments, then we can sort of just jump around. But there's one cool thing I did kind of like in here is that there's a lich that's overseeing the dungeon, because why not? And what I really liked is there's a specific type of undead warrior in here. They're dread warriors.
Yep.
But basically these types of skeletal warriors are linked to the wizard in charge of the Doom Vault. So after 3 rounds of combat, the lich becomes aware that the PCs are doing that. So when he becomes aware, he can take control of the skeleton and cast his spells through the skeleton. So what I can envision happening is you're fighting some random undead, and then suddenly it casts a fireball at you, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
Right? Like that aspect of it, I thought was kind of a really neat idea.
Yeah.
That I could see just stealing for my own campaigns.
It's a good mechanic because it provides a sense of presence of the big bad, and I don't think a lot of dungeons have that. They're kind of like, oh, this is just where they are, and you clear the dungeon until they get there. And I think as hard as people try to have I don't know, you can't hear the combat next door, the whole dungeon swarming down. That's a cool way to do it, right? It's no matter where you are, you're kind of interacting with and if your PCs figure it out, then it makes them even more kind of wanting to kill things quickly and use more resources, right? If they know that they have 3 rounds to get rid of these 7, whatever it is, before the big bad notices that they're there. But I think there should also be consequences to him knowing, right? Does it make the dungeon more difficult? Does he really care?
It probably ramps the awareness level or something like that. I can't remember specifically, but almost guaranteed that there's some sort of consequence to it. But I just really like the idea, because oftentimes when you have magic users as the big bad of a dungeon, you don't really get the payoff at the end, because as a individual threat, I don't find casters particularly scary for your PCs, because either they just cast their save or die spells and your wizard's been imprisoned, you're game over, right? Or they just get blown up, because they don't have a lot of hit points. So if you have PCs that can eliminate their magical protections, they just get mauled super fast. Right? So you either have to give them a bunch of mooks to serve as sort of fodder to let them get a spell off, but most of the time, unless you've put in a lot of ways to prevent the players from even getting into range of them, right? There's so many abilities that characters get to interfere with spell casting if they get into melee range. That it's sometimes not as satisfying. Whereas with this, the wizard can start blowing his spells throughout multiple encounters, and it feels like more of a realistic threat. And it also encourages the players that if they can just endure, the wizard is expending his resources as well.
Yeah.
So even though they're getting beat up, every single encounter that a spell does go off, it's one fewer spell that they're going to have to deal with once they get to the wizard.
It's kind of too bad that the dungeon is so big, and that like perhaps maybe your players can figure this out, that it's being like the big bad wizard is channeling through these minions. But it would be nice if it was a smaller dungeon, because then you could have the conversation of like, oh, do we go rest?
Mm-hmm.
Or like, do we give him the chance to rest as well? Or do we, is this one person? Is it multiple people? Can we press on and try and defeat him? Like, it ends up being like a resource economy management thing between PCs and the big bad at the end, which to me would be like a more interesting thing if it was a smaller dungeon. Mm-hmm. Because now if they're all of a sudden they're going the rest, it's like, okay, we have to deal with all these spells again in the next time we come in. But I think they would go rest anyway. It's too big. They would have to, right? So
well, the thing is too, is if in this particular adventure, but if you use this in a different adventure, there's also the ability to escape, right? So the players know that there's this boss. If you wanted to play things realistically, if the PCs just take off to rest, well, then maybe the wizard rests as well, and then just teleports out the next day, right? Like, why would they hang around, right? Like, it gives you a plausible way of allowing for your big bad to keep escaping, right? And I think that would do a great job of really putting the hate on to your players, because they'll have plenty of interaction through his, undead minions, and it's a super realistic way for them to escape. Yeah. Right? Like, the PCs grind through so much stuff and it's like, oh, we can't keep going. And then they come back the next day and they run into some more undead, but these undead aren't casting any spells.
Right. Well, that's why I think, like, if it was smaller dungeons broken up, like in the case of this mega dungeon, in that scenario, there's absolutely no chance that they ever make it to him unless you're putting him nearby in the zones, right? Like, if there's smaller dungeons, there could actually be the chance of, like, if your PCs are going in thinking, oh, we could get to him this time, right? If it's a race against something versus like, oh, well, it's a mega dungeon, we've got 100 plus places to get through, it's just the chance of getting him, and then it's unsatisfying to be the end and like, oh, what a surprise, he's actually not there. Right? Versus like, oh, we know he's here this time in a smaller dungeon, he's casting spells through him, can we get to him before we have to go rest, or our resources are expended, we just can't go on anymore?
Well, suddenly if you have that type of a big bad that's constantly doing that, you would see your PCs buy a ton of consumables, right? Suddenly scrolls matter a whole lot, because, oh no, we know it's for sure, Evil Jim, and we're gonna get him this time, so let's make sure we're prepared. We know his MO, right? So let's just buy a ton of consumables, and then they get rewarded in their investment, right? They've invested all this preparation and magical resources to get to the big bad, so when the payoff actually happens, it feels good.
Like, and it would be fun. I mean, I think we talked about like the recurring villain in the Flight of the Golden Dragon, the one guy, right? Like, to keep your players prepared like that, even if it's not a big bad of a dungeon, but a character like that, if there is sort of this, you can add a timer to dungeons. If like, oh, Johnny's call sign is at the front of the dungeon, then all your players are like, it's go time, we're going to try and catch him. And then they're like trying to blast through the dungeon, they're a little less careful, they're using all their big spells, right, to try and get through things really quick. Like, I think that would be like a fun dungeon where instead of being like, can we get away with just getting through this room, as opposed to your spellcasters just being like, scrolls, fireballs, everything blowing up, running through walls.
Well, I mean, especially in 5th edition when there's some fewer things to spend money on, encouraging your players to blow a ton of money on consumables seems like a good way of going about it. Also, while we're talking about items, I felt that there was a ton of random +1 magic items in this adventure, like a ton of them. And I was sort of under the impression that 5th edition was supposed to be like the magic items were supposed to be rarer.
Do you think that's like because it was a play test? I know this is a rewrite, but like maybe they didn't have any magic items when their characters were starting at 9th level, so they just like put a bunch of them in there so that when they found them, they could be like, oh, a weapon upgrade in the dungeon.
Maybe. But like, I might just be misremembering. Like, I don't play 5th edition that often, so maybe I'm misremembering that. But I always thought that 5th edition, it was supposed to be rarer. Like, there's no magic item shops or what have you. But like, everybody and their dog in this dungeon has a magic item.
Yeah.
So obviously they're not rare because all the low-level scrubs have low-level magic items.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe it's just the nature of the what is it? The Doom Vault.
Maybe they raided the vault.
Yeah.
Who's to say? Anyways, I guess let's talk about the different chunks of the dungeon. There was, I mean, as much as I dislike mega dungeons in general, there were some pretty neat rooms and encounters in here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you organized your notes in any particular way.
Not really. I kind of just wrote like a note on some things in some of the places, but it was, to me, reading through it, I mean, I think you probably wrote more down about it. I got bored of it because it just seemed like every different zone was like the red wizards were just growing something new in it. It was like, oh, this is where we're growing the oozes. This is where we're growing the golems. Like, have fun getting through it.
Yeah, and what we got here? I wrote down by section. So there's like, was there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9 separate sections.
There's 107 rooms to get through.
It's a mega dungeon. Most of them don't do anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's pick out some fun things. I really like the ooze grottos. So there's a whole dungeon devoted to the breeding of oozes, and the main thing that the Red Wizards are trying to do here is to impart intelligence to oozes.
Mm-hmm.
So they sacrifice like other Red Wizards and intelligent creatures to their experiments, and they've achieved certain levels of success. And that's what makes some of the encounters in here super interesting, is because you're dealing with variant oozes. Right? So I thought, as a dungeon in general, like, of all the chunks, this was definitely one of the ones where I'd be like, yep, I will take this and use it as is. Right? One of the encounters, it's White Maw, not that you'd ever find out the name of it, but the players go into a room and it looks like a giant marble cavern, if you will. And once they go inside, the entrance and the exits seal themselves, and pseudopods start emerging from the ceiling and the floor and the walls and attacking the players, because this ooze covers the entire room. So you're basically fighting an ooze room and stabbing the floor and what have you.
Oozers are neat. I've never really like dealt with any of them, and it's, you know, it always just seems in some of the adventures I've written, it's like, oh, the floor is goopy and it's a black ooze, and it's like, but this is a pretty neat way to like use an ooze. And
well, oozes tend to be really punishing, especially historically. Like, a lot of them destroy equipment and items, so they tend to get used fairly sparingly overall, which is a shame because they're awesome. But I just really liked how this encounter would play out. Right, I can just see it in my head that you can ramp up the doors, and the doors seal themselves, and the players, well, nothing happens immediately. So how do they respond to that?
Yeah,
and then the walls and stuff start attacking you. Well, you can see that whole sort of thing play out. And I liked that the ooze is basically somewhat sentient, but completely insane, because it's basically the fragmented identities of dozens of different creatures that have been sacrificed to it. So it can talk to them, but it's just gibbering insanity.
Yeah.
And then one little detail that I really liked about it is once they kill the ooze, it turns to dust and they drop like a foot, right? So the ooze was like a foot deep everywhere in the room. And I just appreciated that as a little detail.
Yeah, of how much ooze you were actually dealing with.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the I like little things that kind of like prey on the curiosity of players. And one of them, I think it was in the Master's domain, where they called it temples of whatever, shadow and blood. But each of the room had pillars in them that all had different effects if you touched them. I think some of them gave benefits and most of them were negative things. But I always find it funny that like you could discover these pillars in one room and there's always that like edge of curiosity being like, well, that happened at the last pillars in the last room. Like, what happens if we touch these ones?
This is a good one. This is a bad one.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that ties into like going back to the ooze real. There's the ooze master. Like, one of the pillars is an ooze pillar that a red wizard has merged with. So it's a giant red ooze that coats an entire pillar. And what I enjoyed about him, or it, or whatever, is that it just thinks that the PCs are there to be sacrificed to it. So it's like, merge with me, join, type of dealy. And it can't move. So the PCs can kill it, or they can just be like, we're just going to leave you there.
Yeah,
Good luck with the assimilating thing that you got going on.
I guess like if you ever wondered what you should do as a high level caster, just like read some of these adventures and be like what do wizards do when they're in their higher levels? Well, they start creating oozes and adding sentience to things and merging their consciousness with other things. It's like a funny
it seems like most experimentation goes wrong.
Yeah.
Another thing I thought was really good and I would steal in a heartbeat was from the Far Realm Sys. So these are the aberration chambers, if you will. But what I liked is there's an eldritch altar, and when the PCs go in there, it's covered in the carved faces of the PCs themselves.
Yep.
So they walk into the room, and their faces have been carved in this altar. Ooh, spooky. And then there's shadowy illusions of equipment on top. So they can do standard sort of detect magic, roll some checks, etc. But if they put items on top of the altar for 1 minute, those items will become imbued
with their souls.
You don't know that. Right? So, and as written, it only makes their items glow, which is kind of meh. I would probably throw in some sort of actual bonus in there. Maybe it does like shadow damage or something, like something to like entice them a little bit more than just ooh, glowy weapon, boo. Because, as you said there, what it actually does is it sucks the soul of a nearby PC to infuse the item. So what happens is you basically put an item on there, and then one of the PCs, you'll just be like, and you fall unconscious.
Yeah.
Right? And they just fall into a coma, and eventually they'll die. But if the imbued item is placed on the coma PC, they can control their body from inside the item. So basically, as long as they're holding the sword that has their soul in it, they're fine. And I loved it.
It was, I wrote that down too. I thought it was pretty awesome. It was like making sentient magic weapons out of your own PCs. I wondered, does the sentience persist when they're not holding it?
Well, if they're not holding it, if contact is broken for an hour or the item is destroyed, they die.
Like their body dies or the soul dies?
I would say the body dies.
Yeah.
So the soul would stay in the item.
That's what I mean.
Forever.
Could you create sentient magic items here? Is it like a forge for that?
Yeah, I would say so. Not very powerful ones, but for sure.
But you could put your buddy in his sword and then wield him for the rest of time, I guess.
Theoretically, but I don't think the sentient magic item, unless it has its body in this context, wouldn't be able to communicate, right? Because it doesn't give them telepathy or anything like that.
Right, that's right.
It doesn't you don't automatically know where the soul went, but you can use magic items to be like, no, to figure out what happened to their soul. They can figure it out. But I think if the bonus to the bonus of imbuing was good enough, I could see players being like, yeah, I'm going to risk it.
Yeah.
That's a pretty cool sword.
Yeah.
Right? And now suddenly you have this constant concern that you can use as a future plot hook.
Yeah, like going to a blacksmith being like, how can you make this attach to me all the time?
Well, especially if like the players are famous or the sword becomes super cool, because then there's good logic for other people wanting the sword.
Right, yeah.
You can simply have an encounter like, that is the coolest sword I've ever seen. I'm a collector. I will give you...
Can I hold it?
5,000 gold, right? Like, or can I
just want to hold it? I just want to hold it.
Yeah. Right, but then it becomes this future plot hook that you could use, which I can see as fun, right? But that appeals to my aesthetic.
Yeah.
All right, what's something else you liked?
I thought the Beholder domain was kind of interesting. I mean, they don't look like we were talking about before. Like most of the monsters are trapped here, and the Beholder can become an ally. And I don't think like Beholders are. Doesn't like a lot of the adventures we have don't really have. I haven't had any of them in them.
I don't think so.
And I mean, I think we've talked about a long time ago in the past that if you were ever going to encounter a Beholder, you should probably never encounter a Beholder because of their genius.
But they should never be able to be caught. Because,
exactly. Yeah. So this Beholder had been, I think, attacked by the Red Wizards, and some of its eyes were maimed. So it's like willing to parlay with you and plot and scheme to get out, which is. Not take it or leave it. I thought it'd be like kind of a cool encounter with a Beholder to actually try and work with them to get out. And, if you read into Beholders, this would have been his plan all along, that you'd show up, I
knew this was going to happen.
You finally arrived.
Yes.
Yeah. And you'd be like, what do you mean? He's like, I've been waiting for years.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that could be like a fun role-play encounter. And then I thought it was neat how you had like the projections of he was like creating his offspring. So there was like the lesser projections of him from his dreams.
Yeah. There's a lot of opportunity to parlay with naturally evil monsters in here, like hags and things like that, because they have plots of their own that are more important than dealing with the PCs, which I appreciated. One other thing I really liked about this is the whole Golem laboratory area. Mm-hmm. So there's a whole area of this dungeon that's devoted to the creation of golems.
Yep.
So I think it was flesh and clay golems primarily. But it was just cool because it was just a well-designed mini dungeon talking about the construction of golems. Mm-hmm. So from just a standard thematic approach, I thought it was really cool. I like that there's a dwarf there. He's a cleric that pretends to be like, oh, thank goodness, you've rescued me. I've been trapped here for so long, when he's actually just an employee.
Yeah.
Like he's just here. He just got hired to provide the divine magic necessary to make the golems. But as soon as you guys show up, he's just like, oh, thank goodness. And he's not even evil. He's like neutral or something like that. So like all the tells that the PCs might suspect that something's not okay.
I've been wanting to get out of here for so long.
Yeah. Oh, thank goodness, you saved me.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I just really thought that was cool in its own sense, right? It provides you with a really interesting, completely mercenary NPC, right? Like he's not evil. He's not going to attack them, but he doesn't really want the players to win.
No,
right? Because he's got a pretty sweet deal there. Like they're paying him quite well. So as a DM, it provides you with a fair bit of opportunity to kind of play around with that type of a character.
It's a good like reminder that like just because these things are in a bad place, that not all people are bad. Kind of, it's like they're just there to make their buck.
Hey, people work for evil corporations all the time.
Exactly.
Right? You don't have to be a bad person to work for a bad company.
Yeah. I didn't know quite what to make of the like Kraken area. I was like, it just seemed like this is one of the problems I have with the mega dungeon is like, why is it there? Like, aren't these supposed to be like world-ending creatures in D&D? And now it's just like hanging out in a pool.
Well, the whole marine area was a bit much. Like, I totally get that, an evil organization devoted to world domination definitely is going to have monster breeding programs.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it make more sense to just have your aquatic monster breeding program on the coast?
Yeah.
Like, shouldn't it just be like a fish farm or something
like
that.
we don't even really know where this dungeon is. You
It's
just
underground.
It's massive. Yeah,
somewhere.
It's like a continent. It's its own continent.
Maybe it's an extraplanar area.
Mm.
But like the practicality of building all of these tanks to bring in all these, it feels like a zoo more than anything else. Now, I guess the Doom Vault wasn't originally designed because it was some wizard's lair to mess around with stuff, but it effectively feels a bit like a zoo.
Yeah.
Now, sticking with the zoo feeling, one thing that made me smile was that since they have all of these monster breeding facilities ongoing, there's a pig farm to provide the food, and I like that.
Some cohesiveness.
Well, there's just really good dungeon ecology when you think about it. Like, how are they feeding all these monsters? Oh, they have a pig farm, right? And what are they doing with all the waste? Oh, they have otyugs that are eating all the garbage, which I also liked with them because they're kind of intelligent. And as long as you feed them, they'll be your friends.
Yeah.
So you can basically bribe the garbage disposals with like dead bodies.
Like,
and
we're
stuff.
hungry, and you're like, here you go. We killed a bunch of stuff earlier.
Speaking of the pig farm, I don't know if you picked up on it, but it seems almost mean. There's a small sickly pig in the herd of pigs that's actually a polymorphed halfling that theoretically the PCs could somehow figure out.
Yeah, I did read that, but I didn't like read too much into it. I was just like, oh, well, that's another thing.
Well, it just struck me as one of those things that, like, how would you ever figure that out? Like, I don't even know that if you're polymorphed, you detect as magic,
right?
Because you've just been converted.
Or true, yeah.
You've been converted to something else. So, how would the PCs even acknowledge the pigs? Now,
it might behave differently if it still has its intelligence.
Well, let's face it. PCs will pick up on it immediately, because if a player asks, "Oh, is there anything in particular about the herd I should be aware of?" and you can be like, "Well, make a perception roll," and then they roll, and you're like, "One of them is smaller and seems a little sickly." Well, does that mean something? Are you a DM that just throws stuff out that doesn't mean anything? Right?
Yeah.
It's a pretty big tell that there's something particular going on. But
yeah,
I mean, there's a bunch of other random stuff in here, but I do want to talk about the temples of extraction, and I don't want this to be an hour and a half long episode. So this is where the brain's not working, where the chosen champions of the gods are having their divine essences extracted. So they're bound to these random structure-y things. And again, I like this little mini dungeon from a design standpoint. It's cool because, well, in a mega dungeon that has all of these thematic areas, we now have a mini chunk that has a bunch of rooms that all have their own little thematic areas. Because each of the chosen that's having their power drained is causing there to be an environmental effect in the room where this is occurring. So I thought that was super neat. Also, most of the chosen are evil deities, right? So there's, why don't we know this is going on? Because most of them are from like minor gods that you've never heard of before that do weird things, and who cares if some evil drow has been, ooze worshipping drow has been kidnapped. But a couple of them are from goodly gods, which you'd think that their patrons should have noticed. But I kind of like the idea and how it provides a lot of opportunity to play around with some of this stuff. And because you can be rescuing these chosen, it also could provide patrons and hooks for future adventures. Right? So this is why I felt that this should be the major goal of the adventure. Because as written, this is simply a place that they can find out that disrupting the black gates will let them get to the phylactery room. Right? Like, this isn't a main focus whatsoever of the adventure. Just like, oh, okay, let's kill these evil ones and save this halfling, and I guess that's okay, right? It's very bizarre. But because I think, as written, this is the only place that the players can actually find out how to reach the phylactery room, this is the only part of the dungeon that actually is a must reach. Right? Like, you have to come here, they have to investigate what's happening, and they have to succeed on a couple of knowledge rolls to figure out how the whole setup works, which, from an investigation design, I didn't really like, because it gives you only one way of finding out how to reach your goal,
right?
Which is the phylactery chamber in the
Yeah.
end. So I would have liked there to have been other clues somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Which is also why I liked switching this to being the goal, because if this is the goal, then they've succeeded by being here. But now that they're here, it provides them with the opportunity to figure this out, and if they figure it out, then they get to do this sort of extra icing on the cake thing.
Yeah, true.
That if they miss, then it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they don't have to go to the phylactery room. There's not some amazing, cool item there that they need. It's just kind of an interesting tetrahedral, demi-plane where they just
fight a demi-lich.
That's it.
Yeah, there's like nothing going on in there, which is the last part. And I do like, I think, I can't remember which one was the big magic mirror at the end of it, where they could go into the plane of the vault. What adventure was that? Do you remember?
Oh, it was the haunted.
Yeah,
the haunted,
where they had this magic mirror that was the plane they give to the vault of the treasure. But it's like you may never figure that out, and if you do, it's like a nice, like, here you go,
bonus.
and like you could add, like you're saying, you could add that into this if you do end up getting in.
Mistmore? Is it Ghost of Mistmore?
Maybe. But it's like, you would think that it would be difficult to get into like a vault of phylacteries, right? So,
well, it is hard to get into, right? And it's almost impossible for them to figure it out, especially in the adventure itself. It recommends that your players shouldn't be allowed to rest in the dungeon, right? That this should be like get in, get out. But to actually find out how to get to the phylacteries is this one particular place in this giant mega dungeon. So I didn't care for that aspect of it. So that's why I like switching the hooks, because then they're trying to find a specific part of the dungeon where they can get information from like any of the Red Wizards.
Yep.
Or like anyone in the dungeon can point them in the direction of where to go.
Yep.
Now, because of all the key cards and stuff like that, it's not like you can necessarily go there directly. You might have to bounce through a couple of the other areas to get the right access codes for attunements or whatever they call it in here to get there. But it provides them with direction to where they need to go, and then you can throw this kicker at the end, which is good. I'd also probably would have thrown something a little bit more exciting in the phylactery area, other than just like a bunch of phylacteries, because destroying them seems a bit much. Personally, if I was a player,
I'd keep them. Yeah.
I'd use them as
leverage.
Yeah. Exactly. 100%.
Because we've come to found from other adventures, once you have a Lich's phylactery, they'll do your bidding, basically.
Well, Red Hand of Doom, that's the whole thing, right?
Exactly.
So you suddenly have the phylacteries of all the most powerful Liches in Thay. Why would you destroy them? Like, this is a huge...
Become Lord of the Liches.
Oh, Lord of the Liches.
Yeah.
Let me just sell them.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Right? I will give it back to you for 50,000 gold or whatever.
True.
Right? Like, it just...
Because I'm sure they want to get them back as well.
Well, the thing is, you could just sell them to goodly people too.
True. Yeah.
Right? Like, the powers of the realms would be interested in these phylacteries because it provides super powerful means of destruction, right?
Yeah.
Because suddenly, other heroes that might be trying to kill these actual liches can destroy them permanently if they have access to the phylactery, right? You could just create like a lich destroying company.
Yeah.
Right?
Lich Busters.
Lich Busters. To do it. Is there anything else you wanted to point out?
Yeah, nothing else to add. It's a mega dungeon. Like all mega dungeons, there's some really cool stuff in it. It's a lot to get through. I think we've brainstormed some like really cool ideas out of it and how to change it a bit with the hooks. But I could never see myself being interested in running a mega dungeon or even playing in one, but
it's not my style. Yeah. Like I get the appeal, but it's not for me. So if you like mega dungeons, I think this is a pretty good one. And has some really fun stuff going in there. I would definitely see myself using, as we were sort of discussing earlier, the different areas as maybe their own dungeons, because most of the areas I think work really well as little individual sections. Some are kind of just who cares, like forests of slaughter.
Yeah, exactly.
I would just run that in a forest.
Yeah,
I don't need to have a bunch of rooms with trees in it.
Yeah.
It feels definitely more like a monster showcase, which again, this was a playtest adventure, so
it was a monster showcase. Yeah,
right? Let's test an encounter with the new beholder design. Let's test an encounter with the new this design. Let's test an encounter with this, right? Like I get that's a lot of what this adventure was. So that's the goal, which it was. I think it's successful for that. And if you kind of want to expose players to a bunch of random cool fights, I think it works really well from that type of standpoint. The siphoning power from Divine Champions, fantastic.
Cool.
Yeah. It's my favorite part by far. And if I was going to steal anything, it would be that concept. And even building a whole campaign around that, I think would work really, really well.
Yeah, it would. You're right. As always, guys, thank you for listening. I think that's it for this adventure. You can get at us at the Imp and Ogre on Twitters, or theimpandogre@gmail.com, or YouTube comments is, I think, been the majority of our interaction with the community thus far. Next week, we're going to be talking about The Demon God's Fane, which is a sword and sorcery adventure by Monty Cook. Thanks.